My name's Sarah. For those of you who don't know me, I studied at Burnley years ago. Went from Burnley to become a consultant, did that for about 5 years and then moved to local government. I'm now back out consulting on my own. One of my latest jobs has been I've been reviewing tree management plans and construction impact reports for a council. And I have been noticing that there's a few common mistakes that have been popping up in them. And I thought that I would come along and give you some, not that necessarily you make the mistakes, but give some feedback on what those mistakes are and some ideas. It's not comprehensive because we haven't got long enough really, but I hope you get something helpful out of this. One thing, some of these you're going to sit there and go, really? People are making those mistakes? Yes, they are. Almost every report that has come across my desk has got at least one of the mistakes that I'm talking about today in it. So, yeah, but there's also been reports with great things, but yeah. If I can work this out. Okay, first one, I think this is more of a theory of mine. I think a lot of us get confused about who we're writing for. In school, in uni, at TAFE, we're taught when you're writing for someone, think about who your audience is, write for your audience. Our problem as arborists is we've got an awful lot of audiences. We're sitting there thinking this could end up in VCAT or, God forbid, the coroner's court. We need to write for the town planner to understand it, for the building project manager, your architect. We need to write for other arborists. Where do you start? And I think some people actually get a bit confused in trying to write for too many audiences. So one of the things that I've been thinking about and doing for myself as well is I've started thinking about why am I writing the report? And for construction impact and tree management reports, there's two reasons. One is to tell the architect what the impact of its design is going to be on the tree. And the other one is to tell a project manager how best to protect the tree. If you get that message right, you'll also talk to all the other people. But so think about why you're writing the report. As an aside too, for some of us we don't have a background in literature. Writing isn't first nature to us, particularly when you get into the professional language. So a bit of advice that I think really helps in that situation is write the way you would tell a friend, at least your first draft, because all of us are articulate. We can all tell a story. So actually, if you do have problems with that, first draft, write as if you're telling a friend and then go back and look at it and add the professional and the technical language in where it's necessary on your second draft. It's a lot easier when you're looking at something you've already done. And if you're telling a story, we all know how to tell a story, basically. Everything to do with the construction impact reports and tree management plans is pretty much around the Australian standard. Most councils have adopted it. This is a fairly standard permit condition to say we want a tree management plan that complies. If the permit thing says you have to comply, you have to comply. There's no, it doesn't matter if you don't agree with it, that's what they want, so your report has to comply. Sorry, I've got a printout here of a couple of things. Oh, yeah. Putting in your opinion, apologies for this, on the standard, whether it's positive or negative, is probably not the best idea. I've come across a couple of statements. The standard should be construed as a rough guide. It's only used in this report because various local authorities now demand it in their assessments. Another one was the standard says that 2 metres is the minimum TPZ, which is ridiculous for a small young tree. Not good in a professional report. If only because it undermines the authority of your report. Somebody who's not an arborist then looks at it and goes, well, if that's ridiculous, why am I even doing this and following this tree management plan? So if you've got opinions like that, that's great at the bar, but not necessarily in your report itself. The standard itself, I find, is not a bad document. I mean, you can argue for and against, but it does provide a fair guidance for reports and a lot of people are following it. Another big point, though, is some people are copying and pasting whole sections of the standard into their reports. Your client doesn't want to know what the standard says. They want to know how it applies to their tree. If you copy and paste all the different ways to protect the tree, they'll get confused. So I've seen reports which sit there and say, well, you've got to put the tree protection fencing around, but then if this happens, because it's straight from the standard, but then there's also this way of doing it and there's this way of doing it. So which one's the right one for their tree? Which one is your report telling them that they have to do? So be careful with the copying and pasting. It can save time, I do realise that, to put it all in and put it in as appendices or something, but it actually confuses the issue. Your report is about the tree on that site or trees. With construction impact assessments, again, the standard's fairly good at telling you how to set it out, talk about the tree. You start with talking about the tree, you talk about the site history, the existing site conditions that might impact on the tree. Sorry, this is from a tree I looked at up in Upway, I think it was, and I just loved the fact that all the way along there, the tree roots were completely exposed, so the tree seemed to be fine and they kept it, so it was all good. But yeah, this starting bit is fairly straightforward. Sorry, I just don't want to forget anything here. This is where you're telling the story. You want to write so that the person who's reading your report doesn't have to go out on site. They quite often will, but if they haven't got the time, if you want to get it approved really quickly, provide information. It's a story you're telling. So do give the site background. Do set it out. Use photographs. Photographs are wonderful. You can sit there and show something that you don't have to discuss in a lot of words with a photograph. So yes, you're writing for the person so they don't have to go out on site. That's a bit... Okay. No? I'm sorry, I did have a picture of elevations down there. It's disappeared. The next bit is what's proposed on site, which is plans. Plans are difficult to read. I have killed a number of trees in my career because I didn't know how to read plans. I was lucky. I started out with a boss who was very good and still didn't manage to catch me on a couple of things. I had no idea what elevations were when I first started out and didn't realise that because it was on a slope and it was a flat slab, there was ground fill going in and cut going out, and yeah, I've damaged a few trees by not knowing that. And it's not easy stuff to learn. If you can, it's great to work with somebody who, get time to work with somebody who's got the experience and doesn't understand that. If you can't, talk to your architect, talk to the builders. If you've got mates who are architects or builders, have a chat to them, get them to help you understand plans. And whatever you do, even though you can't see them, don't forget the elevations. Elevations are what's going up above ground and what's going down below ground. Down below ground, I mean, you've got basement car parks and so on, are pretty standard on residential blocks these days, particularly in metropolitan Melbourne. The big thing is what's drawn on the other big thing for plans is what's drawn on the line, the outside line on the plan isn't necessarily the outside line of the works. So an underground basement needs a batter. It can be constructed without one. So this is an example in Hawthorn of them constructing without, but they have to sink the piers in and then backfill that to hold the soil before they can start construction. It's a lot more expensive, so it's not a standard way that they'll do it. So unless you actually specify it or talk to them about how they're going to construct it, they will be doing the batter, which takes it out, depending on the depth of the basement that they're building, can take it out a couple of metres. So all of a sudden you're going from an 8% encroachment to a 15% encroachment. So understanding that the plans aren't necessarily the end of the line. Services are rarely ever shown on plans. Services go in last and they go in straight line out to the point of domestic attachment, which means it could go straight through the base of your tree and you haven't seen it, you haven't catered for it, you're not aware. So in the construction impact report is the best place to first start addressing services and suggesting that they be mapped prior to the works commencing and prior to the tree management plan being developed. Going up, not only is how close is the canopy to the tree, do you need to prune half the canopy off to get the building up? Do they need scaffolding around in between the canopy? Because you might have enough room for the canopy but not for the scaffolding and the canopy and the building. The other one that I've come across against when I worked at Bayside was trees going up through awnings because the awnings weren't shown properly on the plans, and then all of a sudden you've got the structure of the awning around the tree branch and someone ringing you up saying, can you come and prune the tree branch so we can finish our awning? That's where elevations get really important, and reading plans is critical. Trees on neighbouring properties, a lot of reports are missing them. They're just not even picking them up. Or if they do pick them up, and this neighbouring properties also means council trees, the amount of times I see, oh, just remove the tree. Sorry, you can't make that call. You can negotiate. Your client can go to the owner of the tree and negotiate the removal, and they might be successful, they might not be, but we can't make that call if somebody else owns the tree. We can recommend it, but you also would recommend to your client that if they are going to take that path, there'll probably be costs associated with it. Councils these days are charging amenity fees, plus the removal cost, plus the replacement costs is pretty standard in Melbourne for a council tree to go. At the very least, if you're doing it to a neighbour, you should have the courtesy of paying for the cost of the works to go, for the tree to go. And it also doesn't matter what kind of tree it is. It can be a small young tree inappropriately planted in a terrible spot. It's still not your call to say the tree goes. It's the council's. Another one here I would say is don't recommend works on them. An awful lot of tree management plans that I see have all pruning needs to be done by a suitably qualified arborist. Actually, no, it needs to be done by the owner's suitably qualified arborist. So be careful with that one. With council trees in particular, there's liabilities involved if someone else does the works without council's authority. So you want to be careful about what you're specifying there. Risk, tree removals. Construction impact reports can end up in recommendations that trees get removed. That does happen. This also, in putting this together, I was talking to a couple of other people who were working council, and this came up as one of their pet peeves as well. Finding an awful lot of reports are subjective. So subjective means they're influenced by feelings. So the owner of the tree is scared of the tree. Her son is allergic to the tree, and this is causing terrible, terrible feelings for them. They're scared that things might fall and then who's legally responsible, stuff like that. I believe, not everybody does agree with me on this one, but I believe that it's absolutely okay to include that in a report as anecdotal background, but you have to specify that it's anecdotal. You don't know. You're an arborist, you can only comment on the tree. So the fact that they may or may not be allergic to it, they may or may not be scared of the tree, anything like that, it's relevant, but it's not fact and it's not objective, so therefore it shouldn't be in the report as part of your findings on the tree, just as part of the background for the site. The other thing with tree removals is generally risk is huge. If you're going to say there's a risk, you've got to provide the risk assessment that you did it with. It doesn't matter if it's track, QTRA, threat. If you've made your own one up, as long as it's repeatable, and you can observe, and I would include a risk matrix so that people can see, a risk matrix usually has one thing in there, likelihood of failure, consequence of failure, gives you a risk. It's an easy way of showing how you came to the conclusion of your risk, the level of risk that the tree poses. It's really integral if you're going to be asking someone to remove a tree, to be able to provide that information so they understand where you're coming from. Major encroachment. You would not believe the amount of people who sit there and say, okay, it's 12%, which constitutes a major encroachment. In my experience, this tree will be fine. That's not demonstrating that the tree will be okay. It means getting out there with a shovel or a hydro excavation. It's looking at where the tree roots are, and it's saying, I've taken a photo, there's no tree roots in this area, or there's only one, given the species type and so on. I mean, you do know how, I'm assuming everyone in this room knows how to do it, but a lot of people are not demonstrating. And that's what AS 4970 says. So you can go closer, you can go you can encroach more than that 10%, you can encroach 40%, 50% if you can prove that the tree roots aren't there and it's not going to damage the tree. Be interested to see that one though. The other one with majoring or encroachments in general, a lot of people aren't providing how they've come to the calculation. So they'll give it's a 10% or an 8% encroachment, but they won't say how far off. So what you want to see, if I'm reviewing it, a report, what I want to see is, okay, it's 10 metres off. Got a TP, the tree's got a TPZ of this. The construction element's 10 metres away from it, and you've said it's that area. Now I can go to with those figures, I can go to a calculator and go, yep, I kind of agree with you. Or no, I don't, or that sounds a bit weird and maybe I need to do more investigation. I can't do it without those figures, so I'm going to reject the report without those figures, basically. And there's tools. I know that calculating the area is not easy for some of us. I used to have a horrible time of it trying to get my head around it because maths is not my first thing, but Paul Mecklin from the Area Rangers has put together a wonderful tool which helps you calculate tree protection zones. Council Arboriculture Victoria, I'll give you the website later, but they've got a copy of it on their website, and Paul's happy for anyone to use it as long as if you ever reference it, you reference it to him and acknowledge that he's, it's his work that's put that calculator together. But he's happy for it to be anyone to use it. And there's tools like that are fantastic, they really do help. Outcome versus prescription. We don't know what we don't know. This is another area that I struggled with when I first started out. Waffle slabs. When I started out, I was told that waffle slabs are the best because they require less excavation, they sit on top of the earth, and really they have minimal impact on the trees. Only problem with the waffle slab is that it still has a beam running down, and there's excavation for that beam. Now this is drawings I just took from the structural engineers in Melbourne, but if you have a look, they've said that the beam depth has to be 150 mil minimum. And theirs looks to be, in this standard drawing, looks to be almost double that. So you've got a 300 mil beam running through a slab that, hang on, I thought would be okay near a tree and wouldn't excavate any roots. So you need to know what there is there are pier and upturn beam slabs, which flip it over. They have got a flat thing and the beam sits up top, and somehow, I'm not an engineer, but somehow it's positioned and built so that it strengthens the slab from sitting up the other way. So if you're going to specify a specific type of slab or an engineering solution, you need to understand what the implications are. A lot of the time I will specify outcomes. If I'm not sure, I'll specify an outcome. So this needs to be built, but within this area there cannot be any excavation. If you are going to specify, do talk to someone, because there's an awful lot of these hiccups. So if you're looking at someone who's putting in a curb back on a road, when they put curb in, the machine that puts a curb in needs a 300 mil space behind the curb, at back of curb, to install a curb. So you've got to actually specify that within the tree protection zone, the curb is removed by hand, but also replaced by hand, formed up by hand. Because if they use it with the machine, then they're going to take it 300 mil closer to your tree, which generally is in a nature strip tree and you haven't got 300 mil to play with. Post holes. You can also try and make it as easy on your client as possible. Post holes are great. I sit there and, re-engineer it so there's post holes and that they can be moved wherever, if you encounter, they can be moved if a significant root is encountered. But they'll just come along and auger it, and the machinery that they use to auger it doesn't feel roots. They can sit there, they'll tell you they do, and they don't. And they'll even laugh about it themselves if you catch them out on site. But a handy specification for that is perhaps dig by hand for the first 400 mil and then use the auger if you haven't encountered any roots. Project arborists, things like that, that's where you bring your project arborist site supervision in for conditions like that in your tree management plan. And your tree management plan. We make these complex, we really do. I've seen 30-page tree management plans. These guys, they're not looking at a tree management plan, they're not going to read it. I came across a guy once, I'd set him up, I'd found him an arborist to write his tree management plans. We'd approved it, we'd worked with him, yep, okay, you've got the contract. I'm driving down the street one day and he was doing exactly what the tree management plan said he couldn't do. And I jumped out the car, what are you doing? And he's like, no, I've got my tree management plan. I was like, yeah, have you read it? No. Because it was one of our typical arborist reports, which are fabulous if you're another arborist and want to read an arborist report. But these guys, they don't use them. I've got to the point where mine are 2-3 pages max. Doesn't matter if it's dot points, it doesn't matter if it's a table. A lot of these companies use Gantt charts. You can even ask them, do you have a process that you use that I can actually fit it into? What they want to know is what they have to happen, how. So you need fencing, it needs to be like, this is how you install it. When? Before demolition starts. Who's responsible? This project manager should probably be signed off by project arborist. You step through, do it chronologically, make it really easy to understand, refer it back to you, give them, if there's steps where you need to do something about the neighbour's property, give them methods of engaging with the neighbouring owner. But keep it simple, keep it really obvious hold points. If you think that there's a project arborist needs to be on site to inspect things, then say, all right, there's a hold point at, you've got start date demo prep, no, but demolition. We have a hold point at demolition because we want the tree protection fencing up by demolition. So give them specific things like that. These guys, they work with that terminology. They work with very brief things and they want to fit it into their bigger plans. If you do have clients you work with regularly, it's really good to talk to them and get, a lot of them will have templates of how to fill in for different jobs, and you can take that and work with them on developing that into an ARB template as well. Terminology in tree management plans. Tree management plans are a direction. They're not a discussion. There's no two ways about it. You're the expert. You're telling them what they have to do to protect the tree. There's only one term, must or must not. Apparently legally, will, shall, recommend, they're not considered mandatory by law. So if you're writing a tree management report, must, please, every time, or must not. Tree management plans also need maps. So maps to show where they are to scale. So there's some free AutoCAD software these days that you can download. It's, if you're competent in most other, sort of Microsoft Office, you can probably work your way around it. I'd recommend you download it, find a couple of tutes online and have a play with it. It's one of the easiest ways to do plans to scale, and you can add your trees in and put your tree protection zones in. You can calculate your encroachments. You can come up with pretty little plans like this that show where the tree protection zones are and where the fencing should be erected. Also, you don't have to just use the basic standard thing. So consider alternatives, such as if your tree is situated close to the building and your tree protection zone goes right up to the edge of the building, but you know that they're going to have scaffold or it's a pathway to get materials out to the back, then perhaps consider putting in a mulched and covered pedestrian walkway. I think I've got, I'll come up to that anyway. But there's alternative methods. I put this in, I spoke to Greenwood Consulting this morning and they've come up with this, and I just thought this was a great example because of a plan, because they've got the plan there. I mean, in this instance, it's a fairly simple one, but what they've got is on the plan, they've got the tree protection requirements, the fencing specifications, your ground protection specifications. Now, if you go back to this one, that could be printed out like that and people shown on site. Here you are, here's your plan, it's got everything on the side, don't need to worry anymore about it. I just thought that was a really nice way to do it, and I'll be probably adopting some of the bits of that myself. But yes, protecting the tree. If you've got ground protection, if you need to access the tree protection zone, your tree management plan also needs to tell people how to do that, and it's amazing how many reports don't. They say, put the fencing up. What they might say is, oh, no excavation shall happen in there. And it's like, yes, but that's great, except that you've got a crossover going in that tree protection zone. So when do they take the fence back? How do they move that? Because they're not allowed to, according to your report. So you've got to put that stuff in there. When do they move the fence? At what point? So should they do it first? Should they do it last? But it's also okay to come up with things outside the box. So one job I had, they had a large, really 10-metre wide nature strip. We were really terrified that they were going to start parking all over the nature strip between heritage trees, and the builders came to us with a proposal to put the site office between the two trees. We, put together a frame so that it reduced the compaction, put the site office there, and all of a sudden no one could park there. The trees were protected. It was put in at the start, taken out at the end. I've seen people build temporary crossovers to assist with the same sort of thing. If you can come up with ideas that are outside the box that help your client, I think it's great. It doesn't all have to be what's in the standard. The standard is the basic and the minimum. So final notes. Date of inspection, date of report written, always handy, especially if it's going to end up in VCAT. Create your own template. I see a few reports that have different fonts, that have cut and paste things, quite obviously. We tend to, and I'm guilty of this, I've just admitted to it, I'm going to take some of Roger's ideas and incorporate them into mine from that plan, into my reports from that plan. If you, we do adopt other people's report templates at times because we see something that we like. Make it your own though. Actually take the time, make your own template. A, it looks more professional, and B, it's a bit more, copying is flattery, but it's not as, it's a bit more of a compliment to the person you're nicking the idea from as well, possibly. I don't know. Present information on all trees present. Doesn't matter if the tree's not going to be impacted. It can be a simple one-liner. This tree will not be impacted. Fine, not going to be discussed any further in the report.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Do you have a guideline in terms of what size trees should or shouldn't be considered? Like, when you've got a tree versus a shrub, what do you work with in terms of cut-off?
I work with the definition of any plant that can become over 6 metres in height. So that rules out shrubs for me. It will depend on what my client is interested in too, but generally shrubs aren't included. I will include young trees though, so recently planted trees, if it's a liquid amber or a eucalyptus or something that will become a big tree, I will include those. I may not write much about them, but I'll note that they're there. Some councils will provide guidelines and say that it has to be over 5 metres in height, so young trees don't matter, they're not bothered. In which case I'll follow, if council gives me direction, but if I don't have direction, I'll just go anything that can grow over 6 metres in height.
Does that include for neighbouring trees as well?
Within 4 to 5 metres of the boundary, again depending.
The same cut-off though for neighbouring trees?
Yeah. Yeah, I do, but again, like a 2 metre a young tree won't have a TPZ that, if it's a young tree 4 metres away, won't have a TPZ. So it will get yes, this tree is here, but it's not going to be impacted in any way whatsoever. So I'm not, yeah.
There's no camellias or anything that will get.
I wouldn't.
4 metres now, but this is how tall it's going to get.
The areas that I work in, camellias don't get that big. No, but yeah, I know what you mean. I personally work to trees, not shrubs. If you're talking boundary fence and they've got a hedge of something, if it's a significant hedge, I probably would comment on it. It would depend on the site. Also depends on the, sort of the neighbourhood and the neighbour, and, is it tenanted, or there's a few value calls I'll make there. Yeah, just finishing up, keeping information in context. I say this because there's an awful lot of, or not an awful lot, there's a few people out there who will put, you'll be reading the report, tree protection fencing as per Appendix 6. And then you've got to scroll through 30 pages, find Appendix 6. Oh, okay, that's what the tree protection fencing looks like. Scroll back through and then keep reading. Not easy for me reviewing the plan, really hard for anyone who's actually using it on site, and they're not going to do that again. If you're going to, sometimes we have to combine construction impact and tree management plan reports. The best reports I see make the tree management plan easily separate, so easy to separate. So here's your 2-3 pages at the back, which is the tree management plan that you can pull out and just give, so you don't have to give the whole report to the people on site. They're not interested. They're not really going to read it. Consider, is it relevant? Some reports, and look, I was taught to do this at uni, some reports include the weather, the soil type, the soil gradient. And that can be really relevant in some instances, but the weather's only kind of relevant if it impacts on how you can observe the tree, or if it impacts on your observations at the time that you're looking at it, or if you're talking about it as being a particular risk, or referring to Ken James's research or something like that. The weather, most times, it was a nice sunny day when I looked at the tree, really doesn't make much of a difference. So is it relevant? Does it really need to be in the report? Does it contribute to the story? And then this is the website that I was talking about, Council Arboriculture Victoria. They've got a tree report writing guideline on there, and they've got a couple of different calculators, and it's on their resources page, and I would encourage everyone to have a look at them, have a play with them, whether you use them or not, up to you, but they are good resources. So I don't know if I've missed anything that anyone was hoping to get out of this, or if anyone's got some ideas, arguments, disputes. I've just come back from holiday. I've fallen in love with our busiers at the moment, so I thought I'd share one with you. But yeah, if anyone's got anything they'd like to contribute to the discussion as well, I'm not the only one. So yes.
Just in terms of the tree protection zone, being calculated on a website called
Swift Docs?
Swift Docs actually allows you to create a circle of any size and rectangles of which you can encroach into the
Okay.
of any size. And there's 2 rectangles.
Okay,
You use that to create multiple.
yeah. It sounds similar to the one that's on CAV. They're great. They're fantastic tools, I think, and thank you to anyone who's bothered to create something and share something like that. Yes.
Are you aware of very many people using arboriculture to calculate the TPZ encroachments?
I've not heard of it. Doesn't mean it's not been referenced in any reports that I've looked at, but then I haven't found very many references in the reports that I've been looking at as to how people have been doing the calculations. So no, I don't know. Arbicad, yeah. Sorry, I'm going to be writing these down as soon as I sit back down again. Yeah.
How do you look at existing TPZ intrusion from infrastructure that's already there compared to what you have to calculate out for the new infrastructure? And how old does that have to be before you don't consider it recent?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I find that really, it's really important, because not so much for where the tree is at the moment, because that will inform my idea of what the impact will be, and potentially what I'm recommending about what they're planning to do there. As again, the one where I find it the most interesting is if the tree has a TPZ that goes into neighbouring properties, and you'll often have construction development going on over there and over there. And it is fairly recent, and I have in the past included that work as impact and said, no, you've got to redefine your design, which doesn't go down well, because you're essentially, you know, they're saying, well, they got in first, so therefore I'm restricted. Yeah.
So
but
would you consider a 5-year-old development recent, or would you say after 5 years of the tree?
it'd depend on the tree, the age of the tree, the species. I'd probably be more cautious around eucalypts than I would around elms and some other European species. Because of the way the tree roots grow, and the fact that, you know, sort of eucs tend to have a less roots out there. But it really gets down to what's on site, unfortunately, and what's being proposed as well. Also, whether or not they're willing to do mitigation, which I have recommended in the past, but I don't put a lot of faith in, because there's an awful lot of people, and I've seen this, yeah, we'll do that, and then you walk away and nothing ever happens. So, yeah.
Fairly normal on most sites, isn't it?
It is, very much so. Yes. Yeah, no, sorry, I don't have a clear answer on that one. Mick?
Do you think it's a good idea that in arborist reports we recommend retention values or arb values? Because I've stopped doing retention values because there's so many variables in retention of a tree that I put an arb value that it's high and medium or low. It comes to the ecological, a whole heap of other stuff comes into the equation rather than just the arb value of the tree.
I think it'd depend on how you define a retention value. I mean, as an arborist, you can only really comment on the arb value of retention. So I can't comment on the ecological value of it. I don't have the expertise. So my retention value is based on my expertise, so I guess my retention value would be your arb value. I think we're coming down to, terminology there and how you define it.
I think lots of reports don't define what it is. They just say it's got a high retention value and let's leave it at that, and it doesn't really mean much in the report.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I find, definitions do help, but then I also find that for usability of the report, perhaps in a construction impact report, definitions are important, but once you get into tree management reports, I find that they just add to the bulk that makes it less user-friendly. So yes. Sorry, there was a lady up the back.
When you're talking about like the alternative engineering techniques that can be used, like your waffle slab example, do you have any like good resources for us as arboriculturalists to look at and become aware of some of those? Because I know that sometimes when you speak to engineers, they get it set in their minds that that's the way they want to do it, and there's not really an alternative. Like, what's a good way to educate ourselves on what is actually doable?
It's a really good question, and one I don't have a really good answer for. I know one arborist who went and did an engineering degree so he could learn to talk to engineers. Probably not the best idea. I learned a lot from working with council. I used to go to the civil engineers and the building surveyors and talk to them. If anyone here is currently working for council, it is one of the best resources you can ever have, I think, working there, because you have somebody from all these disciplines that you can go and approach and talk. But the other thing is, as a consulting arborist, council, town planners, engineers, building surveyors are actually very keen to help. They want the best possible outcome as well. So it is worth, if you can't talk to your client or ask questions of that, it is worth going to the council and saying, have you got 10 minutes? Can I come in and see you? Or do you know about this project? For me, it's been networking mostly and broadening. I've got a couple of friends who are builders, and it started out as me going down and grumbling and them going, well, actually, they want to do it like this because of, and it's like, oh, okay, light goes on. And now I will take things to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or am I making life harder for them or making it better? I will also talk to my client. Architects will generally have a fair idea of what's going on. Civil engineers are better. Sorry, so I know there's an architect here today. I didn't mean that in that way, but they have provided me with better information and better understanding of how things are grown. But it's been very patchy. I haven't found any one particular place that I've learnt this from. As I said, I had a mentor, my first boss mentored me quite heavily, and then working with local government, I had that access to all those different people. I just think, yeah, anyone who's got that opportunity should take advantage of it. Yeah.
Regarding retention values, I think I saw in the presentation that you had that all neighbouring trees would have a high retention value. Is that as in regards to protecting them, or as actual your value that you have in your report?
It's probably a bit of both, because it's not your... You can make a case for... You can help your client make the case to go to the neighbour and say, hey, this tree isn't great, but ultimately it's the neighbour's decision. So the retention value is high because it's the neighbour's property and you have to look after it first and foremost.
So I'm not suggesting that you have any intent to remove or
Yeah.
it should be, but just actually putting a value in your report. If you had a really poor specimen next door, would you, just because it is out of bounds as such, it's not your decision to make what happens in that tree, you would put it as high retention, or you would give it the retention that you think it deserves, but on the same side?
Legally, you have an obligation to look after your neighbour's property. You're not allowed to do any damage to it, regardless of whether it's a poor specimen or a great specimen. So from that perspective, it's a high retention value tree. I think that's where I'm coming, yeah, that's probably more where I'm coming from. Rather than the quality of the tree, it's the fact that you legally have an obligation to look after their property.
So in your report, you would always have it as high retention?
Yeah, I do. I list them as high retention. I might list them as... I might have another value in there that states that they're not particularly a great specimen and that this might contribute, or that might impact on our ability to protect them.
So high retention, and you might have some comments.
That's correct, yeah. So I would still put... My retention value wouldn't necessarily... It doesn't mean it's going to have good health, good structure. It might have poor health, poor structure, but it's still high retention.
It's probably important for that to be in the descriptors as well. I reviewed a report recently and I saw that all the neighbours' trees were high retention value, and I thought, oh, and all the trees on the side were of low retention value, and I thought that was a bit bizarre. But when I read the descriptors, the author of the report explained that was, the
That was why, yeah.
Third party ownership.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's really good advice. Yeah. Is that it? Yep.
Any last questions? I love this space. I reckon it's a great conversations to have.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank Sarah for having us with us today.